super important. So obviously you all are here because you maybe think it's important too, or you want to learn more about why it's important. And sometimes we kind of think there's a huge connection between self-love and being better change agents for social justice. So loving yourself and being confident in the identities you hold can help you be more powerful for a lot of the movements you want to get involved in that kind of change the way society shapes how we view our identities. And so really having that solid understanding of self-love in itself and how that is for you and how you practice self-love is really cool to kind of learn about. So we're here to explore that a little bit more. We do want to kind of create a safe space, so we want to make sure that everyone is really respectful of everybody else's realities. Whatever is shared kind of stays here in the room. We're all really sharing up to your comfort level, but maybe pushing it a little bit. If you know, challenged by choice, say what you want to say. You don't have to bare your souls in this room or anything like that, but if you have something to say, we'd love to hear it. It'll help for the discussion, and it'll help us all learn from each other as much as possible. So is there anything that you need from us or from everyone else in the room to make sure you feel comfortable to share here today? Nothing in particular? Okay, awesome. Well, if something comes up, please let us know. We want to make sure everyone's in a comfortable space here.
And I just wanted to add, if you have to excuse yourself early because of class or anything, any other obligations, that's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. You can just go out through the back door. Perfect.
So we just want to get started. If you kind of want to move up next to someone you're close to, body up with the person next to you, we encourage you to reach out to people you didn't come here with potentially, so you can kind of get to know some new people. But basically, we just want you to share what's listed on the board, your name, your major, or your occupation, if you're not a student, why you came to this workshop, and your favorite me time activity. So if you want to go ahead and get that started.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. What's up? I'm Holly. Nice to meet you. Abby? Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Put that off my shoulder.
Well, you do. Alright, to kind of give you perspective, we have like a minute and a half left, just to make sure both people can share.
Also, just kind of, I also went to our, I actually reached the class about activity nutrition development for mental strength and stuff, and my main goal to learn a little self-love and be able to pass them on to others. And I think it's really important at that age. And my favorite me time activity is probably singing and playing guitar, and I don't really play for other people, so it's definitely
Sounds like everyone's getting close to done. So if we could have everyone kind of focus back up front. Is there anyone that would like to share their favorite me time activity that they talked about?
I like to go camping or go to nature, just a little place in nature.
I'm out in nature.
I actually compliment myself every morning.
That's awesome. Do you have like sticky notes, or you just wake up and compliment yourself?
I kind of just look at myself and I'm like, okay, so what is something that I love about myself?
Nice. Very cool. That's awesome. Anyone else want to share what they do? Okay, it's okay. That's totally fine. You can kind of just kind of think all those things that you like to do for fun. And kind of keep that in mind throughout the rest of the workshop.
going to dive into some definitions that Chris and I came up with of what self-love is. And it's embracing the characteristics that distinguish you as an individual and practice of affirming your fabulousness. So, what's your name again?
Natieli.
Natiri?
Natieli, yeah.
Natiri? Like she said, you know, she compliments herself in the morning. So that's an act of affirming that you are perfect in your own way. And lastly, it's acknowledging that, you know, we do have societal pressures that exist in sometimes hindering our journey in practicing self-love. And we also came up with another quote or definition for self-love. It's the most powerful love the soul could ever experience is the divine love of self. So again, really just knowing that, you know, the first love of your life is you, and really accepting yourself and accepting who you are, and, you know, just saying I am who I am, and there's no other perfect way.
Yeah, and so we really want to just kind of start off with these definitions of self-love, so we're all kind of on the same space on what it is, if you're not familiar with it, or if you are, just kind of affirming kind of your thoughts about what it is. So we kind of want to move on to having a definition of self-love and knowing what that is, and it could be different for every single person in this room, but kind of thinking about in what ways society shapes the way we feel about the identities we have, and how that can kind of affect how we think about ourselves. So we kind of put up some identities to prompt any of y'all, but I mean, there's tons of them, not all of them are listed, so if there's one up here that we don't touch on, feel free to share that. But how does society shape how you feel about your identity of gender, or body size, or citizen status, or your religion? Anything you have, we just kind of want to open it up to the floor and kind of see how society shapes how you feel about yourself in relation to identities you hold.
Well, a lot of the magazine stuff for women is like we're supposed to be meticulously put together no matter what, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that there's pressure on us from the Glamour magazine kind of thing that we're supposed to look a certain way or be a certain way to be okay. I know that affects people in this kind of older, for sure.
Yeah, basically just how does society make you feel about who you are as a person, and any of these identities. So all of these identities are kind of who you are, and they make up a lot of your experiences. So how does society shape how you view your race, or your gender, or your age, or how do they make you feel about yourself?
I think they're very narrow depictions. For the most part, you know, you have a stereotypical A type, and whatever is not that A type is, you know, the not A, and that can be pretty much anything else. So as a woman, you know, we all kind of have our stereotypical image of what that is, and I think who is in charge of the media is such a narrow portion, again, of the population. So who are they to really say
Exactly.
what that is?
And this type A portion is a lot of the dominant identities. It's all of the dominant identities. So you're upheld if you don't meet every single dominant identity. Automatically, society is going to tell you that you're not enough, or what identities you hold aren't okay. And you know, when you kind of get that constantly all the time, at every single angle, no matter what you're doing throughout the day, it kind of feeds in subconsciously. You don't even notice it anymore. And it becomes like things that you internalize or you think is the truth then. Kind of what society is telling you about your identities. So I think it is very narrow, you're right. Are there any other identities that you can relate to up here that you've had personal impact with?
Personal impact being like you, or maybe even a friend or a family member.
Well, I think in general, like, we talked about, like, images for women. I think it's hard for, like, black women, too, because all the pretty women are, like, white with long hair and skinny bodies and stuff. So I think it's hard for, like, black girls to kind of accept themselves, because they think they have to have lighter skin and long hair and stuff like that.
So we touched a lot on body size and race or ethnic identity. Are there any others up here that stand out? Possibly citizen status?
people have a hard time stating their beliefs for fear of being outcasted. I mean, obviously there's lots of different religions, but, you know, the mention of God anymore, it's almost taboo, you know, we're not supposed to say it in the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. So I think that's a really tough topic for a lot of people, no matter what your religious background.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up, because I was in a workshop years ago and someone said that they were atheist, and like when they said that, the room just kind of felt different after that, and it almost felt as if like that person wasn't welcomed during that time. No one said anything to this individual, but it just
Right.
the
Tone is different.
yeah, the vibe totally changed. So.
And I think when it,
I think that's interesting because I think sometimes these images that are given to us from society or from media start to present a narrative that brings up a question within us. So with the atheists, right, they were like, wow, what's that mean? And I'm uncomfortable with that because I might be uncomfortable with my religion. But how does that comment across all of these identities, right, that we're given some presentation or expectation that creates a narrative, and then we start to map back and forth. And a while back I heard someone talking about cell phone charge. If you don't use your cell phone all day, you've got a full battery at the end of the day. But if you're constantly connecting or texting, right, you're constantly having to use that battery to fuel something. So if in my identities I'm trying to navigate different narratives that are being given to me, if I'm having to push back or answer questions or navigate all that, basically if I have less privilege, and I end up at the end of the day with a lower battery.
Yeah.
that's
It's
a
a
really
great
good
metaphor.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times society really emphasizes the difference piece. So anytime that you don't fit the norm, you're automatically it's a difference, and like we're taught that difference is bad, so then it automatically puts projections on people where we don't want to be associated with them, or we make them feel worse about themselves because they don't fit what is supposed to be perfect in any kind of sense that is. And then it kind of does some like self-loathing with ourselves where we don't need that either. So it's kind of a battle on like twofold where we project it on other people that we want to have this image and we want to be a certain way, but then we kind of reflect on ourselves on how are we meeting that too. So, yeah.
Ability. So all disabilities are invisible, and I've dealt with that through my adult life. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and there was a time several years ago where it was very difficult for me to walk long periods. I could walk, but my doctor gave me a permanent disability parking pass. And I remember walking out of a store one day, and this man stopped when I was getting into my car, and he says, "You don't look disabled to me." And I said, "Well, thank you." Thanks. And he goes, "Well, what are you doing parking there?" I says, "I really don't think it's any good business."
Yeah.
But it's just so I'm having to justify.
Yeah.
I no longer use the permit because I've had surgery on my feet. But during that time, it's very difficult, you know, having to justify my disability to total strangers.
Yeah.
When it was none of their business. But that's hard. I think people need to be sensitive that not all disabilities are visible.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I was also going to talk about ability. I think another thing with ability is that there's so many different, I guess, like mental, physical, and emotional abilities and disabilities. So I think what comes to mind most of the time is physical disabilities. And I think with that, we are kind of told that you're not supposed to talk about it and that you're not supposed to ask questions. And so that inherently, like, you start to think that that's bad. And I think that comes up a lot with race as well, that we act like colorblindness exists. So by acting like that identity doesn't exist, you're not validating it for people. But when you look at mental and emotional abilities and disabilities, that is portrayed very in a very specific way in the media. There's a very specific stigma attached to that. So trying to kind of get help for that or trying to navigate that for yourself can be really difficult, especially, I mean, all throughout your life, but if you're dealing with that as a young person, trying to navigate that can be especially difficult.
I like that silence piece you brought up. We're taught to be silent about things that we don't know about, so then we don't learn or have conversations or discussions that are so necessary to empower yourselves, and then also learn that difference really isn't as bad as it seems. It's not bad at all. It's like what makes everyone who they are. And I think that gets forgotten a lot of the time. So instead of seeing people, we see an identity. And usually it's one major identity that's noticeable, or maybe it isn't. And then we classify that person or group of people into one big clump. And then it takes away from interactions we can have with people who can be extremely meaningful and change our lives, but we'll never really know that until we kind of take that step to like push the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, and I also like that you mentioned validating that identity. Like when you validate that this identity exists, it brings in compassion and saying, they're people just like I am, and no matter what their identity is, they are still a person, and they should be able to experience the same type of things that I experience, and equality and love and all of those wonderful things. So thank you.
Any last minute?
I sometimes feel like a walking contradiction because I am queer and Christian. So it's kind of interesting because sometimes I don't feel like I fit into either group because there are some homophobic Christians and some like people who are queer who are really anti-religion. So it's kind of interesting.
And I think, having those two identities, a lot of times you have to fit into one to be in a group. So like, maybe you're not queer enough for the queer community, or you're not, Christian enough for the Christian community. So it's like, how do you determine who you want to have your community with when both are telling you that you're not enough of something when you're just who you are, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you all came up with some great examples.
Thank you so much. So we're going to kind of build on that for a while. So basically there are a ton of oppressive forces in society that can really affect how we view ourselves and self-love. We're going to focus on 2 today just because we only have an hour and a half and it's a lot to analyze every single thing, so we chose 2 that really resonated with us when we were creating the workshop. And the 2 are media and negative self-talk. So we've already kind of mentioned media a lot in this kind of open discussion, just because it is so prevalent in our lives. And negative self-talk is another thing that I think we all do all the time. So they're 2 things that are really just hitting us hard in both angles. And so these 2 oppressive forces can have a lot of negative effects on us, of which we listed a couple on the side. So shame, stigma, silence, bias, apologies, things like that. There's tons of lists of these effects that come from what media tells us about our identities and what we tell ourselves about who we should be. And so we're going to kind of explore both of those a little more throughout this presentation. So are there any effects that stick out to any of you when you see this? Like automatically you're like, yes, I resonate with silence, or anything like that? So I think silence is a big one for me. Kind of about what Laura was saying, like not asking questions and feeling pressure that you can't do things like that. And I kind of think it hinders a lot of self-growth and a lot of interactions with people.
Violence towards myself. Something I experienced.
I haven't actually thought my own experience, but I know that in the news we've been hearing a lot about like people who make comments about something that's controversial and then they're forced to apologize for it. Like maybe someone in the media will lose their job if they don't apologize, or someone just stating their own opinion is forced to apologize for it.
Apologies are a big one.
Do you all ever find yourselves apologizing for stuff for no reason? Like, you accidentally, or I don't know, like you were 2 minutes late and you're like, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. And it's just like a lot of apology, and almost to a point where the person next to you questions like, why are you apologizing so much? Like, it's okay, it's fine.
I think a big one for me is I'll be like walking down the hall and someone bumps into me and then I'm like, oh sorry, like, and it's like, what? I didn't bump into you, you bumped into me. But it's like automatically we just are like trained to like say sorry for things that we shouldn't be, but it's just
I think a trick with self-love, trying to navigate and fill that glass, that shame can be tricky too, right? Hey, I was late for our lunch meeting. I feel guilty about, so I want to be sorry about, or I feel guilty about being late. But how can that slip into shame? Like, oh, I'm such a bad person, I'm such a bad friend because I'm late. And so Brene Brown has done a lot of neat stuff around categorizing guilt and shame in different boxes, which I think can talk about self-love.
Yeah, and along with that, like in this journey to self-love, shame and all of these things, they don't serve us in any way. If anything, it puts, I think, puts a lot of pressure on us and brings us down. I'm experiencing right now trying to navigate what's going on after graduation, and oftentimes I feel like I shame myself for not having a concrete plan right now, and that next step, I don't have a job right now, so I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to go out and find a job and hurry up and do it. And I think sometimes I'm working on it though. It's taking away from me being present in these last precious moments of my undergraduate career at CSU. So that's just my example.
And can everyone read this quote that's up here? I don't know. I'm like blind, so I can't. Okay. It says, if you are not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. So something just kind of ponder as we move forward. Are there any last minute thoughts anyone wants to get out?
So this next slide kind of talks more about the media influences, and we kind of came up with some more recent examples of some things that we saw in the media and how it relates to shaming and stigma and silence. So take a moment to look at some of these. Let me know if you have questions, because I know if you're sitting in the back it's kind of hard to see. And just point out one that you have a question on or that you want to talk about.
What's the cartoon one? The drawing?
Yeah, so the cartoon drawing is, it says heteronormity. And does everyone know what that is in the room? Heteronormativity. Chris, help me out with that.
Okay, so basically it's just saying that it's like the norm of a male being with a female. So it's very heterosexual, it's heteronormative because heterosexual is the norm. So it kind of just combines heterosexual and norm.
Yeah, and it doesn't really acknowledge that there are other sexual orientation identities out there, and often skips over those, or even if you see like a television show with a couple who identifies as gay, I've noticed that a lot of times it's a comedy show and it's really funny and almost is like a joke. So that kind of relates to this idea of heteronormativity.
And those relationships stand out more. So like when a couple's walking down the street and it's like a male identified, or what you perceive to be a male identified and a woman identified couple together, that doesn't stick out in your mind. You're kind of just like, oh, couple. But if you see like two women identified individuals holding hands, like you're like, oh my gosh, look, like, I don't know, you're like, good for them, or like, you go, like, that's awesome. But it's like, you would never like call attention to like like a couple, a male and woman. You go, that's awesome, you be together. You know what I mean? So it just makes it like a more obvious distinction that they're outside of the norm.
But I would say even two women walking down the street holding hands isn't as unusual as two men.
Yeah.
My girlfriends will arm in arm, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good point. Any others that you all have questions about or stand out to you? Yep.
The Gabrielle Douglas picture, are they like talking about hair?
Yeah, do you mind, do you know what that's all about?
Yeah, like, I think it was kind of, I don't know, disrespectful and just really messed up, because she was like the first black Olympian gymnast or something like that, and all throughout the media, all they were doing was talking about how her hair was kind of poofed up and wasn't flat like the rest of the contestants who were white or Asian or people who have pretty naturally straight hair. And instead of talking about the fact that she was the very first black female Olympian, they're talking about her hair.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed, I don't know if any of you all noticed or heard this while this was going on, that a lot of the backlash I received was from her own community of black women. So again, that ties back to this self-love and almost internalizing hate and how that can affect other people. And it just is some terrible things that they said about her hair and her identity, and the focus wasn't on how amazing she did in all of her competitions. So it wasn't appropriate. And so, any others that stand out? How about with the male images? I think a lot of times we don't really talk about how men are affected by body image and their pressures that they face. So are there any
males in the room that would like to touch on that with media influence? Not to call out all the guys in the room. Yeah, thank you.
I think we're like by media, we're supposed to like always work out and just kind of be stronger, like more built. And I guess I have a hard time with that because I don't really like going to the gym. But I really like running and I really like biking and stuff. So it's like a different workout, but it doesn't give me like the same build as like working out in the gym.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. So it sounds like with, you know, for men, there's this pressure on you need to go to the gym, you need to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it says right there, don't be a girly man. So if you don't look like that, you're like automatically categorized as being soft and almost like your identity doesn't even matter of who you are because you don't look like that. And, you know, it doesn't really touch on that. Everyone has different fitness goals. Everyone doesn't have to look like that, and some people don't want to. So I like that you brought that up. Yes?
I'm not a guy, but I've also noticed too how like in the media, it's maybe not just media, but like the focus on men too is that they, like you're saying, I guess they don't have to be tougher and less calm. But what's the problem really with having a guy who is more sensitive or someone who doesn't necessarily have to work out but is more intellectual? And why does it always have to be tough and fit instead of something else?
Yeah. And concealing that emotion and not having a safe place to really express themselves. I mean, because a lot of times men are outcasted when they express their emotions or when they feel sad. They're like, man up, man, you're just being really soft about that. So again, it's not fair that we do that or two different identities. Yes.
I remember in my psychology class, we were talking about some branch of psychology. We was watching a video where there was like, you know, women are depicted in media as kind of like weak or they even said very like childlike, like even like the poses for the magazines and all this other stuff. And then men, they always depict men as these gritty, Rambo type, sophisticated even, but they're all like manly. There's like no, they really don't depict men as like being geeky or skinny or kind of like awkward. You know, actually there's a lot of guys that are, they're not like, I don't know, they always make them seem like more manly or sophisticated.
And I think I mean with a lot of things that you learn about with like social justice or diversity or anything related, everything is very overlapped. And so there's a lot of effects that come from associating what a male-identified person is supposed to look like and who they're supposed to be. And so by saying don't be a girly man, so that's one, telling them that they have to be tough and strong and be this one thing. But then it's also putting down women in the same sense that you cannot be girl, you can't be a girl, you can't be associated with feminine characteristics. So that's sexism in itself. So then it layers another thing on how women feel about themselves and how they're projected, because men don't want to be categorized as women and women don't want to be categorized as women sometimes because we have all these binds that are on top of us. So I mean, like I could talk about that for hours just because I'm so passionate about that kind of stuff. But there's like all these things that just overlap and encase everybody on who they're supposed to be, and they kind of define you in boxes. So they are all these characteristics you're supposed to be. So men are supposed to be, you know, tough, strong, the breadwinners, intelligent, independent, those kind of things. And women are supposed to be passive and soft and caring and like the nurturing ones. And so when anyone steps outside of those boxes to be anything different, society just kind of encapsulates you back into the box because it is so scary being on the outside and being ridiculed constantly all the time that it almost perpetuates and keeps you inside the boxes so you don't even challenge what's going on. And so it just like keeps playing in and out of itself, and it's like this endless cycle, which I won't stop. So.
I think one thing I've noticed is with men in the last, 10 years or so, is that you're seeing more men stay-at-home dads, and the woman being the breadwinner. But what the men have to deal with, in that role, was my husband, for example, he's much more nurturing than I am. And I would have loved for him to have been able to stay home. I wish I could have made the money he was making, so he could stay home and I could, But it's hard to watch that. And my husband was very involved in our children's school as they were going through school and field trips and camping trips and everything. And some of the fathers actually were upset with him. They call him out on it and say, what, are you trying to give me a bad name? You know, I can't keep up with what you're doing. And so he was even getting that backlash from the males, so.
And he's just trying to be a supportive dad.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Anything else before we move forward?
Cool, so we're going to start moving into like what negative self-talk is. Basically our definition of what we perceive negative self-talk to be is conscious or unconscious judgment, which is the key word, which is why it's bolded, about the way you view yourself and your experiences. So we have the picture of Mean Girls. Has everyone seen Mean Girls before? Okay, well if you haven't, there's this scene where all of them are kind of standing in front of the mirror and they're just listing off all of these things that are terrible about themselves. So, oh, my pores are so big, I have man shoulders, my hairline's too far back. And so they just like go and talk about all these things that they feel inadequate about themselves, and it's just like this constant, and when you say these things, the power of your thoughts is really profound. And so when you constantly are saying things about your identity, whether it's looks or whether it's about your race or your citizen status, your religion, if you keep telling yourself things about your identities that you have, you kind of start to internalize those things and think that it's the truth. And a lot of the negative self-talk comes from a ton of different avenues, like media. So when you see all these reflections of who's the typical beautiful person, or who the typical influential person is in business or in any of your kind of job fields, or whatever it is that you see, when you don't meet that, then you kind of start questioning yourself, and you're kind of like, oh, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I be there? When it's not even having anything to really do with you. It's kind of like what society has shaped for ourselves, and so, but it becomes like an individualized problem. So, are there any examples y'all have of negative self-talk that you know that you do yourselves, or you've kind of seen other people do?
The tendency is that I love to set goals and achieve them, but sometimes I set them too high, and then that's a setup for self.
Right.
You know, by not babysitting through, I could just go through.
I do that all the time, where I have like a vision for something, and it's like, oh, it's gonna be right here, and then I'm like, right here, and I'm like, nope, it wasn't good enough, so then the whole thing is just,
Right,
you know.
see, so I have to back off and do baby steps, and then remember to go, okay, did that, that's good.
Thanks for sharing.
I noticed in high school, not as much now, but like women would, I'd like compliment a woman on how she looks, and then she'd like kind of deny it. That I don't look good today or something like that. So.
Like, who, me? What? You're talking to me? It's interesting that you brought that up. Yeah.
I think a very common one is I'm not good enough. I've heard like, it's like 90% of people I surround myself with like just say not good enough.
Any others?
I think it's kind of an interesting concept because we're also told that like we can't be overly confident, we have to be humble, and so a lot of people take being humble as like being down on themselves, which I think is like really hard because like where do you draw that line between like being humble and like still loving yourself?
How do we define humble?
And how do you define it now?
Now I define humble, I used to think it was kind of that definition, but now I define humble as being calm and centered because you know your head's coming and nothing can stand between you and good. So to me, that's the humility of you know, is okay. You don't have to be less good.
So now we're just going to show you all a short video. It's called the Dove Real Beauty Sketches, and it epitomizes this idea of negative self-talk and how we absorb the perceptions of what the ideal standard of beauty is. So Dove hired a sketch analyst to sketch different women the way they describe themselves, and then they asked, well, we don't want to give away the video, so let's just watch the video. And as you're watching it, just think of think about how you're feeling and
what comes up for you during the video?
I'm a forensic artist.
Can everyone hear? I can't tell.
Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there's a guy with a drafting board. We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
Kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is a sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter. Looks sadder, too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. Couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.
So of course that was in the context of like body image and kind of like how you view yourself. But I mean this kind of talk can relate really to any circumstance we have with negative self-talk. So it can be about anything, whether it's you're not good enough in your work and you can't accomplish the task that you set yourself up to do, so you set too high of expectations, so you kind of get down on yourself on that, or you fail the test and so you're like, oh, I'm not smart, like this sucks, I need to do more of these things. And it can, and a lot of times it relates to identity and how you view yourself and how you think others are viewing you. And I think when we're upheld to these unattainable standards, and we're always upheld to the dominant view or the dominant identities in society, and when our identities don't match up to that, we automatically start hating ourselves for that piece and questioning ourselves, kind of like we've talked about. But we internalize those notions, and then that becomes our vision of truth. So all of these things that we're not good enough at, that becomes who we are. And instead of embracing who we are and thinking about all the positive things we can do and loving our identities and knowing that that's just who we are, and using those to better ourselves and become really powerful entities and like movements that we're passionate about. So for me, that's like sexism. Like I'm all about that, and like I want to go and break down those barriers. But when I constantly am reflecting on myself and I'm not proud of who I am, and I think about all the identities I hold and where I fall short, that makes me not a powerful force to go and fight against all these oppressions and go and tell society that they're wrong and that I can be whoever I want to be because that's who I am. So I have to start believing that and internalizing all the good things about myself and loving who I am to be able to go and tell everybody else to do the same and then unite everyone together so we're all like, yeah, society sucks and we rock. So
So how can we practice this positive self-talk more? Any ideas? Well, look no further. We're going to do it today, right now. So when you all came in, we gave you handouts, and it should say self-love. It's like has a pretty flower on it. So with this handout, we're going to give you all some time to quietly sit with your thoughts and how you're feeling throughout the presentation, and think about some positive affirmations for yourself and more positive self-talk about yourself and your identity, your behaviors, anything that comes to mind that relates to you being more positive and absorbing self-love and staying on that journey. So we'll give you like 3 to 5 minutes to do that, and yeah, share back out where it's comfortable. And is that clear? Do you all have questions?
Are we writing it down?
Yeah. So did you get the handout?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're not like like you don't want to write stuff down, you're more of like a mental person, that's okay too. That's just for you.
And it's gonna, can I snag this real quick? It's on the back here. But you're not restricted, so if you want to write it in the corners, if you want to write around the borders, make it your own.
statements or affirmations you're gonna start telling yourself?
One of mine is to remember that every failure is a learning opportunity. Like if you mess something up, instead of being like, oh, dang it, you just be like, okay, I learned my lesson, I won't do that again.
Sounds for appreciation. Well, I work with kids, I guess, so I look to be something, I aim to be an example, I guess, and I want to live my life in accordance to what I would have been as a young girl looking up to, and be a positive, kind of, just mentor.
Others? You want to share yours?
I'll share one of mine, sure. One of mine is I can be a woman and still become a powerful force in this world. And be, not become, I am still. Still working on this.
And my unapologetic statement is, I am an assertive woman who honors the way I feel and what I want. One more, if you all want. Yeah, go ahead.
I said I'm awesome.
I'm awesome.
And it's from the show How I Met Your Mother.
Uh-huh.
You guys have seen that. But like one of the main characters, like no matter what someone asks him, he's just like, oh, it's because I'm awesome.
I like that. That's good. That's great. All of these are awesome. Awesome.
Alright, so to kind of further give y'all some more tools with self-love is to kind of take note of when you're experiencing negative self-talk or shame about something you're seeing, interactions you're having with other people, and really take into account and acknowledge the feelings you're having about that. So if you do see an image and you're like, oh, like I wish I looked like that or something, acknowledge that you're feeling that way. But then reaffirm yourself with a positive statement so you don't stay dwelling in that negative effort or in that negative talk, and you make it a positive and say, no, but I am this, this, and this, so that's okay, like I can keep moving on from it. So really acknowledge what you're feeling, but then take that a step further and really try and affirm yourself and ground yourself in what you love about yourself. Yeah, so it's really important to just take shame whenever you feel it about your body or any identity you have. And then it's also important to kind of observe yourself in relation to negative self-talk you project onto other people. So whenever you're kind of like thinking about somebody else and their identities they have, when you're kind of comparing them to the dominant standard or something, just kind of take into acknowledge when you're doing that, because you're holding yourself to that standard as well and you don't like it. So it's really hard and shameful when we do that to other people and we're like, oh, well, they're not this either, you know? We kind of do ourselves in comparison that way, and that can be really detrimental as well. So really taking into account when you do accidentally shame someone else, and just kind of acknowledge the feelings that are associated with that, and then, you know, positive affirmations about them maybe or yourself, and just kind of just be really observant and intentional about when there's negative self-talk going on in relation to yourself or others. And write it down, draw a picture, whatever kind of comes to mind.
And if you want to expand on this idea of empowering yourself through the media, so we found this online resource platform, The Body is Not an Apology, and what that is a online connection, and it relates to social media also, about practicing radical self-love. So they have this thing or campaign sort of called Bad Picture Monday, and bad, what we deem as bad. So it's pretty much posting a picture of yourself that you would say, oh, I don't look so hot in that, and posting it on your social media page and acknowledging that it's still a beautiful picture because it's you, and acknowledging that in whatever form resonates with you. So we have some examples that we'd like to share with you all today. So these are our Bad Picture Mondays, and it was funny because when I posted this, I got a lot of likes. Like, it was crazy on Facebook, and it just shows, like, you know, I can still be silly and embrace that silly side of me, and, you know, still saying that that is a funky, fun picture of Brie. So
Well, how about when you're not trying to be silly and the picture comes out that way, you go, really? Is that really me?
That's true. And just acknowledging that, you know, again, that's still who you are and that's you.
Yeah,
And
that's scary sometimes.
in the most fun in whatever way, or funky way, you know, that you weren't even trying to do that, but it's still you, and, you know, there shouldn't be any shame or guilt about a photo, because it's you.
I always find myself when people tag me in pictures, I'm like, oh god, I gotta get on my Facebook like right away, gotta remove myself so no one sees it. But like now I'm kind of more chill about it. I'm like, oh, you know, that's just who I am, that's who I am, so that's just kind of leaving it. But it's all to your comfort level, I understand like not everyone will do that, but something to consider.
So if you think back to our very first slide of media influence, these are some images that kind of reverse that oppression from the media. So take a moment to look at them and let's have a quick chat about some of these. Questions, anything, anybody want to bring up anything about some of these pictures? Can you see them? Yes. Okay. How about this one? We talked a lot about men and body image. Let's look at that one a little bit more. Does anyone want to bring up some things that come to mind when they see this photo? Yeah.
Well, I've always found it interesting that I've fallen to this trap too, that society loves to have someone tan and tan is youthful. But in all reality, you're actually poisoning your skin and your body. It's really not healthy to be super tan. And just the difference between the two is always kind of it's made me stop and think before.
Yeah. And this guy is pretty tan and muscular, and he has his own, very own style of color. And is embracing who he is. And that, I still think both images are sexy in their own way. And then how about this one? I'm not sure if you all saw the image of the Victoria's Secret models. That picture actually was I Love My Body campaign. It's really different. But this one represents different women from different identities and shapes and sizes. So we just made this slide so that we can look at some ways that we are challenging those media influences and embracing the self-love in ourselves and other people.
One that I really like that I want to point out is the picture on the far left, the coming out one. I don't know if you can read the bottom, but it says, one day we won't come out, we will just say we are in love, and that will be all that matters. And I think that is just I want that so bad. So.
And then this one is a picture of Gabrielle Sidibe, and it was at the Golden Globe Awards. She got a lot of bad attention about the way she was dressed, and her quote is, to people making mean comments about my GQ pics, I most definitely cried about it on that private jet on my way to my dream job last night. So reversing it and saying whatever, I am who I am, and I look beautiful in this dress, and you have no place in this world telling me how I should look.
So, just kind of summing up everything we've talked about, we've pretty much touched on all of these things, but why does self-love matter and how is it important in social justice movements? So, first one, avoiding conformity to societal norms. So, being able to embrace your identities and who you are and saying, you know what, society, screw you, I'm going to do my thing and I love who I am. And so, instead of internalizing what society tells you about yourself, you can break free and have a new vision of truth for what you want yourself to be defined as. And it's not such a narrow construction of who you are and your identities. That kind of ties into self-awareness and reflection. So a lot of the negative self-talk, being really intentional on reflecting when you're experiencing that for yourself or for others, and then really trying to intentionally give yourself those positive affirmations and kind of understand yourself in comparison to society and in ways that you want to be viewed and how you want to be perceived. Preventing burnout. So social justice can be really, really exhausting and draining when you're trying to do all these different things, and it's not an overnight kind of change. There's a lot that goes into it. We've talked about how a lot of impressions are overlapping, and it can be really discouraging sometimes. And so it's hard to not look away from the movements and be like, oh, like what am I doing? How am I being an influence to this? That kind of thing. And so when you don't have self-love for yourself, and you're downing yourself about your identities, and you're trying to have enough energy to go and combat what society's saying, you're just going to be burnt out all over the place. And so it's really important to practice self-love so you can be a strong, confident individual and human being and know that your identities are awesome. And then you can go out and be really influential in any of the movements you're passionate about and really kind of bring your confidence and your liberation to kind of free others and change institutions and what society is telling us. So kind of like the same thing, honoring your values and visions, what you find is important, and being confident in your cause and being passionate about what you're passionate about, and being unapologetic in who you are and bringing that to every single thing you do.
So, after going through this workshop and doing some reflection, what did you initially think about yourselves and how, and your identities, and what has somewhat changed about that? So coming in today, what did you think initially about some of your identities in coming into this workshop, and how has that changed? What has surprised you? Has nothing changed?
Well, it's reminded me that I still have work to be done.